I'd like to welcome all of you here, and I'm supposed to ask you to please be seated, but everybody is so well behaved, you're all seated and ready to go. So I do want to mention that these presentations are provided thanks to the generous support of Dutch Naval, everything that's being presented here. This presentation may be recorded, and if it is, then you won't be seen on the recording, but your question may be heard on the audio track. So just to let you know that. Very happy to introduce Bill Cavaliere to all of you. Bill, would you like to come up front so I can get a good look at you? Bill Cavaliere is president of the Cochise County Historical Society, and he sits on the board of the Arizona Historical Society's Southern Chapter. He lectures frequently on the Chiricahua Apaches at colleges and historical societies. He has written numerous articles for historical journals and magazines. And he has most recently finished his book, and the name of the book is The Chiricahua Apaches, A Concise History, and he happened to bring some copies for you in case you would be interested in purchasing. Bill retired in 2012 after 28 years in law enforcement, all of it along the border. He is the former sheriff of Hidalgo County, New Mexico. And prior to this, he worked for the U.S. Forest Service in the Chiricahua Mountains. He and his wife, Jill, live on a cattle ranch, and they own the 4-bar cottages in Portal, Arizona. Bill is going to be presenting the history of the Chiricahua Apaches, who were native to southeast Arizona, southwest New Mexico, and northern Mexico. This presentation follows their arrival in this area, and famous Chiricahuans such as Cochise, Naiche, I found so many pronunciations for him, is that correct?
That's correct,
Naiche and Geronimo. Their conflicts with incoming white settlers and subsequent battles with the U.S. Army, peace treaties, and the various aspects of their culture. So we welcome you, Bill.
Thank you for that nice intro. It makes me want to come and hear myself. Yeah, I'm here to talk about the Chiricahua Apaches. The area that was just described to you, southeast Arizona, southwest New Mexico, northern Mexico, was known as Apacheria. So you'll probably hear me mention that during my talk. Let's see if I could figure this out. I know nothing. I was explaining to the gentleman about computers.
Is it not moving for you?
I know nothing. My wife got me a laptop, turned in the most expensive deck of solitaire cards I've ever owned. This is typical whenever I.
Okay.
Touched. Oh. Okay, anthropologists have concluded that the Chiricahuas originated from Athabascan-speaking cultures that originated in Siberia 10,000 years ago. Of course, the Bering Sea wasn't there. There was a land bridge, which they called Beringia. And they migrated from Siberia across Beringia down to Alaska. The Inuits in Alaska, the Eskimos, as they call them, speak almost similar language to the Chiricahua Apaches down here in the Southwest. I find that amazing. There's a great book called From the Land of Everwinter by Dr. Danny Seymour. She did a lot of research, and she has words in it from the Inuits and words from the Apaches that she compared almost identical. At any rate, they came down through Canada and into the final destination as far south as northern Mexico. It gets further complicated because the Athabascan tribes are divided into these 7 tribes of the Lipan Apaches, the Jicarilla Apaches, the Mescaleros, the Navajos. A lot of people are surprised to hear they're actually Apaches. Western Apaches, the Kiowa Apaches, and the Chiricahuas. And of course, the Chiricahuas are the ones I'm going to be speaking about today. Now, it gets further complicated because each one of these tribes are further divided into bands. So, the 4 bands of the Chiricahua Apaches, the Jaconan, which translates to Red Cliff people, the Chihene, you hear the referred to the warm springs, translates to red paint people because of the red paint on their face. The Nednai, the enemy people, and the Badonkahe, Earth They Own It people. I'm pronouncing these in, I guess, what you call the English way or the gringo way, because my Chiricahua Apaches tell me it's not Badonkahe, it's Badonkahe, and not Chacona, but Chacona. You know, and there, it's a very complex language where there's a lot of deep-throated sounds. Best way I could describe it. Here's a map of Apacheria. This map is taken out of my book, and it shows the ranges of the 4 bands. The Badonkahes were right up here. One of the most famous Badonkahes was Geronimo, because he was never a chief, though. This is the Warm Springs, or Chihene. They range as far east as the Rio Grande. The Chaconan, famous Chaconans, Cochise, his son Naiche. And then the Nednai range down into Mexico and that Blue Hill of New Mexico. The famous Apache chief named Hu, it's spelled J-U-H, pronounced Hu. He was a famous Nednai. So this is Apacheria. Cochise, no known photograph of Cochise. There was never any photograph taken of him as far as they know. If there was, it's never been one uncovered. Cochise was a remarkable man. If he was alive today, he would probably be kind of a doctor or an attorney or something like that. Very brilliant man. I'll explain why in a little bit. But Cochise, it was the infamous Bascom incident. And what happened in the Bascom incident was Cochise and the whites were on pretty much friendly terms. Now, the Chiricahua Apaches and the Mexicans were traditional enemies. For as long as the Spaniards came to Mexico, the Apaches and the Chiricahuas were enemies. But when the whites first arrived here, they were on pretty good terms until the Bascom incident in 1861. What happened was a little boy was kidnapped down in the Sonoyta Valley, Felix Ward, and he also went by Felix Tejas. And he was kidnapped by Coyotero Apaches. And remember I showed the 7, and I showed the Western Apaches? The Coyoteros are one of the bands of the Westerns. There was a young lieutenant by the name of George Nicholas Bascom. He was only an officer for 2 years and had never dealt with Indians before. So Felix Ward's stepfather, John Ward, goes to Fort Buchanan and reports to Bascom that his stepson had been kidnapped and his herd of cattle had been stolen by the Apaches. Well, Bascom, you know, who's the most famous Apache around? Who's the only one he's ever heard of? Cochise. So Bascom assumes Cochise was the one who kidnapped the boy. So he sets up camp in Apache Pass, and he sends out word that he wants to talk to Cochise. The very next day, Cochise shows up and goes in Bascom's tent. Now, Cochise had with him his wife, his brother, his 2 nephews, and his little 5-year-old boy, who turned out to be Naiche. We'll talk about Naiche later. Now, Cochise was guilty. Would he take his wife and little boy with him into the tent to, this military officer? That kind of tells me right there. Bascom should have said, oh, this is probably the wrong man. Cochise not only says, no, I didn't take the boy, but he offers Bascom to help find him. Bascom calls Cochise a liar. He has the tent surrounded and tells them they're all prisoners. Cochise jumps up, pulls out a knife, splits the tent, runs out. The soldiers start shooting at him, and he runs up the hill. Bascom holds Cochise's family as hostages. Cochise and his warriors they captured 2 white men. Cochise shows up on a hill and says, give me my family back or I'll kill these men. Bascom says, no, give me the boy. Well, Cochise is kind of criticized for this, but he kills his 2 white hostages. Bascom gets Cochise's brother and 2 nephews and hangs them from a tree. This starts the Apache Wars. There were battles over the water at Apache Spring. Every time the army would come, the Apaches would fight them. So the army decided to build a fort to protect the spring. How many have been to Fort Bowie? Raise your hand. Quite a few of you. If you haven't been there, I really recommend you go. It's an amazing place. Because from the parking lot, it's a 1.5 mile walk to the fort. But the 1.5 mile walk is absolutely amazing because you stop and here's the ruins of the Butterfield Stage Station. That's where a lot of the action took place with the Bascom affair. Then you walk a little further, there's a marker where Bascom had the tent, where Cochise split the tent and escaped. You walk further, and there's where the Battle of Apache Pass took place. And all these amazing, the cemetery, the Apache Springs that they fought over. So this is what Fort Bowie looked like back then. Now, I mentioned Cochise was a really smart man. This is a plaque that we just dedicated we're just talking about that, at the Chiricahua Desert Museum on Highway 80 north of Rodeo, New Mexico. If anybody ever goes up there, kind of out of the way, but if you want to get out for a drive for a day, I see some people smiling, raising their hand, you've been there and seen this plaque. We just dedicated this last February, and this is a plaque commemorating the Battle of Chiricahua Pass. What happened was, after the Bascom affair and Cochise declared war on the United States, he had attacked a ranch and stolen some cattle, and Reuben Bernard, and about 60 soldiers from Fort Bowie went after Cochise, and they caught up to him and his warriors in Rucker Canyon, and there was this battle that lasted 5 hours. 2 soldiers were killed. They weren't sure how many Apaches were killed. They estimated maybe about 10 because the Apaches would take their dead away with them. What's amazing about this, 2 things. More soldiers were awarded the Medal of Honor for a 1-day battle than any other battle in the history of the United States Army. More so than any battle in Vietnam, World War II, the Civil War happened during the Apache Wars right here in Cochise County. How many people have heard of that? Not many people. So we honored the 33 soldiers who received the Medal of Honor. But what is also amazing is Reuben Bernard was so impressed watching Cochise with his military tactics that he actually complimented Cochise in his report to his superiors. He called Cochise the most intelligent hostile Indian on the continent and said his warriors were recklessly brave. So when we had this dedication ceremony, not only did we have a gentleman who spoke about the Medal of Honor, but I had 2 Chiricahua Apaches there, and they spoke too, and it was a really impressive ceremony. We're really happy with the outcome. A little town like that, we had 180 people show up. Okay, now, the governor of Arizona is just getting tired of all the settlers and the farmers and people getting killed during the Apache Wars. He appeals to President Ulysses Grant. Please do something. So Grant sends a general by the name of Oliver Howard, and he says to Howard, go into Arizona and find Cochise and make peace with him. We need these killings to stop. So Howard, he was known as a Christian general, lost an arm in the Civil War, carried a Bible with him all the time. He goes to Fort Bowie, and he meets Cochise's only white friend, Tom Jeffords. Remember the movie Broken Arrow, Jimmy Stewart? That was based on a true story. So Howard tells Jeffords, I want you to get Cochise and bring me here to Fort Bowie. We want to talk about peace. Do you think Cochise was about to walk into Fort Bowie after what happened to him with Bascom? So Jeffords tells him, I can find Cochise, he said, but he's not stepping foot near here. He goes, if you want to talk to him, you're going to have to go to his camp. So Howard, he had an aide with him by the name of Captain Joseph Sladen. Howard and Sladen, guided by Jeffords, go into Cochise's camp. And they stay there for almost 2 weeks. There's an absolutely fantastic book. It's one of my all-time favorite books called Making Peace with Cochise. If you have not read it, buy it. Sladen kept a journal. So he and Howard are staying pretty much in the camp of the enemy Okay, this would be like a United States general today staying with the Taliban or something like that. You get my point. And Sladen is writing everything he sees, all about how the Apaches lived, how they ate, what they did, their clothing, and it's an absolutely fantastic book. Well, anyway, in October 1872, in the Dragoon Mountains, Cochise sits on a big flat rock on one side, General Howard on the other. Tom Jeffers, who spoke Apache, translates in the middle, and they agreed to a peace treaty. It was a wonderful peace treaty. Howard said, I want you to get all your warriors, all your people, and go to the San Carlos Reservation. Remember how I told you Cochise was? Cochise says, yeah, I want peace. He said, I got a counter offer. Why don't you let us stay on our homelands and make our homelands the reservation? How's that for a bargain, you know? Howard couldn't think of any reason why to deny him, you know? So we said, okay. And Howard said, Cochise said, one more thing. We want Tom Jeffers as the Indian agent. So they were over here in the Dragoon Mountains, and that's where they sat when they made the peace treaty. So the reservation went northeast to Steens Peak. It went down what is now the Arizona-New Mexico state line. Back then, if they weren't states, they were territories, to the Mexican border, west for 55 miles, angled back up along the western slope of the Dragoon Mountains back to the starting point, and that was a Chiricahua reservation. Everybody was happy. The white people were happy. The Apaches stopped killing them. The Chiricahuas were happy. They didn't have to leave their homeland. Everybody was happy except the Mexicans, because Chiricahuas kept raiding in Mexico, killing Mexicans. But the Mexicans weren't part of the peace treaty. But anyway, General Howard was satisfied. Ulysses Grant was satisfied. So what happened? Well, 2 years after Cochise died, 1876, the government abolished the reservation. Back to war. Here's Tom Jeffers. But Tom Jeffers, he had the mail contract. And back when the Apache was still at war with the whites, before the peace treaty, he was losing his riders. The Apaches were killing them. Tom Jeffers got tired of it. He walked into Cochise's camp. All these warriors had guns pointed at him. He took off his gun belt and pointed it down. Cochise said, let's see what this guy, either he's got something important to say or he's a little cuckoo, you know. And Howard, Jeffers said, look, these are mail riders. They have nothing to do with the military. They're sending letters, civilians, you know, doing fine in Arizona, wish you were here, stuff like that. There's no reason for you to kill them. And Cochise ordered his warriors, stop killing the mail riders. That's how Tom Jeffers and Cochise became best friends. By the way, the story about the blood brother, you know, that was just fiction. That never really happened. But it was an amazing, really amazing story. Tom Jeffers was an amazing man. Now, this is the actual rock that Cochise and Jeffers and General Howard sat on. What happened was, remember that was in 1872. In 1895, a woman journalist from Los Angeles named Alice Rollins Crane, she's fascinated by the story. She comes to Arizona. By this time, Cochise is long dead. I think Howard had already passed away. She tracks down Tom Jeffers. He's still alive. He's an elderly man. She said, do you remember the rock you sat on when you made peace with Cochise? He said, I'll never forget it. She said, can you take me there? And he said, sure. She had a little camera and she took this remarkable photo. That's the actual rock. Now, if you go to the Cochise stronghold now, you go by that campground, you know, there's a pictograph on the rock and it says Council Rock. That sign was put up before anybody knew where the actual site was. The Forest Service was just making a best estimate of where it was in the general area. It's nowhere near the actual site. But we took this photo and looked for years and years. You've been to the Dragoons, like a needle in a haystack, hundreds of square miles of rocks and boulders, but we found it. So we were really, really happy because I've been on that rock, and to know that you're sitting there where Cochise himself and General Howard sat, it's a very moving experience, for me at least. In October, this October, it's going to be the 150th anniversary of the peace treaty. Now, the Cochise County Historical Society, we're planning on having a commemoration. I would like to have it at the Cochise Stronghold, if possible. We wouldn't have it here. This is just, you know, just a hike to get to it. No trail and boulders and rattlesnakes and stuff like that. But hopefully we'll have it. I don't know the process with the Forest Service. I'll have to contact District Ranger. We need to get a special use permit, whatever. But I have some Chiricahua friends. I know some descendants of Cochise. And one of our board members has met descendants of General Howard. Wouldn't it be great to have them there this coming October? Stay tuned. This is in the Cochise Stronghold, this plaque. It's really nice that the Forest Service put it up there. It's got one mistake on it. It says Chief Cochise, greatest of Apache warriors, died June 8th, 1874, in his favorite stronghold, interred secretly by his followers. The exact place of burial was known only to one white man, his blood brother, Tom Jeffers. And of course, the blood brother is a mistake. That never happened. And that's true. When Cochise died, his people lowered him down into a crevice, and Tom Jeffers was there. Tom Jeffers took the location to his grave, and to this day, nobody knows where Cochise is buried. I mentioned the little boy during the Bascom affair, Cochise's son, 5 years old, Naiche. Cochise had two sons. His oldest son was named Taza. There's no known photograph of Taza. A lot of books, old books, have a photograph, and it said it was Taza. And that photograph, I don't know, about 10 or 12 years ago, the original negative was found, and it turned out it was signed on the back, and it wasn't Taza after all. It was a Chiricahua, but his name was Naiche. So, no known photograph of Cochise, no known photograph of Taza. Naiche, there's lots of photographs of him. The average height of a Chiricahua, and I go into this in the book, was 5'5". That surprised a lot of people. Naiche stood about 6 feet tall. He towered over all the other Chiricahua Apaches. So when Cochise died, Taza, the oldest son, became a chief. Taza went on a goodwill trip to Washington, D.C., and he contracted pneumonia while he was there. He passed away in D.C. He's actually buried in the Congressional Cemetery in Washington, D.C. So word gets back to Naiche, and he becomes the last of the hereditary chiefs of the Chiricahua Apaches. And every white man that met Cochise that wrote about him, I've read all these different documents, I've always seen the same two words used: tall, and they always use the word handsome. Anytime a white person describes Naiche. Okay, Geronimo was never a chief. He was like a medicine man or a shaman. Geronimo had this very boisterous personality. He seemed to enjoy all the headlines, the unpolitically correct, bloodthirsty red savage, red devils and all that. While Naiche, the chief, was very quiet by nature, very stoic. So, whose name became the famous, the most well-known? Geronimo. Like I tell everybody, in World War II, when paratroopers jumped out of an airplane, they didn't yell Naiche, but they were yelling. So that's always kind of irked me, because Naiche's life story is, to me, so much more interesting than Geronimo. And there's a million biographies about Geronimo. Every year a new one comes out. I mean, how much do we know about Geronimo? So I've been working on a biography on Naiche. I want to correct that. Very interesting story about Naiche, very tragic. General George Crook, Indian fighter, he spent years and years chasing the Chiricahua Apaches, trying to get them to surrender, caught up with them several times. And the thing about General Crook was, he was actually one of the Chiricahua Apaches' best friends. He was a real humanitarian. He always tried to get the best deal for them. Always, and Geronimo would always screw things up. He always tried to get them to where they spent the least amount of time, if they had to go to a prison or something. Oh, Ranger, you're only there for 2 years, and you go back to the reservation. And again, I mentioned in the book how all the Chiricahua Apaches suffered because of what decisions that Geronimo made. We hear about the hostile Chiricahua Apaches, and there's a lot written about them in movies and all that. The majority of the Chiricahua Apaches, when they were told to go to the reservation after the army the government abolished the Chiricahua reservation that Cochise negotiated. They were sent to San Carlos and they were sent to Port Apache, and they all stayed there, and they were very cooperative. There were like 380 on the reservation, and they just stayed on the reservation, and they didn't cause any trouble. Then Geronimo, and unfortunately, he influences Naiche, and this ragtag group of about 30 are the ones going around murdering and causing all the problems, okay? And that's who you hear about. And General Crook had this idea of going to the reservation and talking to the cooperative Apaches and asking them to work for him as scouts. Because the army had been running around in circles trying to get the Apaches and getting nowhere. And it wasn't until they used Apache against Apache when they finally started making headway. Only when they had Apaches working as scouts. And the scouts were always loyal, always loyal. They hated Geronimo and Naiche. They hated the renegades because they knew we're gonna end up paying for what Geronimo and Naiche are doing. And that's exactly what ended up happening. It's a very, very sad story. Very, very sad what happened. I like this photo. This is General Crook. He didn't like wearing the uniforms. When he was out in the field chasing the Apaches, he wore civilian clothes. Here's some of the Apache scouts. You read the accounts of the Army soldiers, they were all won over by the scouts. There's a great book called Apache Campaign in the Sierra Madre by Captain John Burke. And he talks about camping with the Apache scouts, and they were all having fun together. And, you know, he talks about how much a good time and jovial they were and all that. And the Apache scouts were so far, he said they were like deer. The white soldiers couldn't keep up with them. And they finally trailed the renegade Apaches, and the Apache scouts were a day ahead of the white soldiers. And the Apache scouts, they could hear the gunshots, were actually in battle with Geronimo and Naiche. And finally, hours later, the white soldiers would catch up. That's how loyal the Apache scouts were. And probably one of the most shameful episodes in the history of this country, after the final surrender, the government arrested all the Apache scouts and sent them as POWs too. Okay, here's General Crook. This is a famous photo, Canyon de los Embudos, the Canyon of the Funnels. Been down there. It's got these rock walls tunneled down. General Crook right here, he wore that African pith helmet, civilian clothes. Captain Burke, who wrote the Apache campaign in the Sierra Madre. Everybody in this photo has been identified. See a little bit of Sam Faison, Cyrus Roberts. Here's Geronimo sitting right here. Nana Noche, Marion Moss, three of the interpreters, Gatewood, there's Tommy Blair, the mule packer. Everybody's been identified in the photo. This place is really hard to find, but we were finally able to find it. There was a second photo taken. I'll show you that in a second. This is 12-year-old Charlie Roberts, Captain Roberts' son. I still don't know the details, but he asked his father if he could come along. I don't. Did he ask his wife, "Hey, you mind if I take Charlie with us? We're just gonna go meet these bloodthirsty savages." And then he, gets home. I imagine in school how I spent my summer vacation. I don't know. It's just an amazing story. But he went into the military and he ended up being like a brigadier general in, I think he passed away in the 1950s. So anyway, they meet and, do I have that other photo here? Yeah, this is a photo. That other photo, there was no skyline. You could barely see a mountain back here. And I walked down Budos Creek and we found this curved tree too. So we were able to find the exact spot where they sat. You could still see Geronimo. Here's Captain Roberts with his back to the camera. General Crook in profile. See him there with the pith helmet? And you know something about the other photo? This photo is real famous. It's in just about every book of the Apaches. Anybody says, "Where's Naiche?" We know Naiche was there because negotiations got really heated. General Crook was saying, "Well, you're gonna need to go be sent away to prison." And Geronimo, "We're not gonna go. We'll kick for." And all the Apaches were getting, and it said these soldiers wrote that Naiche, all he did was raise his hands. Didn't even say anything. Raise his hands, and instantly all the Apaches got quiet. So we know Naiche was there. Well, this was one of 19 photos. There's all different photos. Have you seen famous ones on t-shirts of the Apaches standing with their rifles and on horseback and all that? It was a photographer from Tombstone and C.S. Fly, he took these. And Naiche's in a lot of the photos, but why wasn't he at the conference? Well, I looked at every one of the photos of Naiche, and I looked at every one of the Apache warriors, and looked at the configuration of the clothes they wore. This one had on a white shirt and black pants. This one had on black pants, a white vest. This one had on, only Naiche wore white pants, a long black coat, and he had a strap around his chest with a telescope on it. He probably got from a battle with the Mexicans. He took off a dead officer. And so I was finally able to find Naiche right here with his back to the camera. You can see the strap there. Well, the result of that conference was the Apaches agreed to surrender to General Crook. General Crook goes back to Fort Bowie to telegraph the president, tell him the good news. There was a fellow by the name of, from Tombstone, Charles Triboulet. Triboulet sold whiskey and mezcal tequila. He followed the army around and he sold it to the soldiers and to the Apaches. Well, when he found out that Naiche and Geronimo agreed to surrender, Triboulet goes into their camp and tells Naiche and Geronimo, first of all, he sold them 15 gallons of tequila. Then he said, oh, you didn't hear? No, they're not sending you to the prison. They're going to hang you. And so Geronimo and Naiche, and not all of them, but a group of them escape again. They renege on the surrender and they leave. Why do you think Triboulet told them that? I gotta figure out why. Right there.
Loses the liquor sales.
Yeah, he loses liquor. He'd lose his business. That was his bread and butter. Selling. If the Apache Wars ended, he'd be out of a job. So he wanted the wars to continue. So the soldiers arrive at Fort Bowie and they tell Crook they escaped again. So Grover Cleveland's the president. He's absolutely livid, and General Sherman. General Crook answered to Sherman and of course the president. They're really, really mad. Neither Sherman or Grover Cleveland liked the idea that Crook was using Apache scouts. Anything the scouts could do, the white soldiers could do, and they could do it better. So they tell Crook that they thought that maybe the scouts allowed Naiche and Geronimo to surrender. So Crook says, you know what, I'm just gonna resign. I'm gonna resign from the Department of Arizona, send me to another department. So Sheridan says, fine, transfer them to the Department of the Platte. And they bring in Nelson Miles. Nelson Miles was the complete opposite of Crook. Miles was a real egotistical, glory-seeking, presidential aspirations, that type of thing. And he tells Sheridan, he tells Grover Cleveland, yeah, we don't need scouts. We can catch them. We can catch them. So General Nelson Miles and his men are, Miles doesn't actually go out in the field. He's staying at the officers' quarters, the commanding officers' quarters, and he's sending his men after Geronimo and Naiche in Mexico. Leonard Wood and Lawton. What's his first name? Henry Lawton. And Wood and Lawton and their men are just going around in circles. So Miles doesn't tell Grover Cleveland, but he gets a couple scouts. When they get the scouts, Martin and Quieta, the two scouts, and along with Lieutenant Charles Gatewood. And Martin and Quieta lead Gatewood to Geronimo and Naiche. And long story short, they finally agree to surrender. Gatewood leads them to Skeleton Canyon in the Palencia Mountains, just barely in Arizona. And on September 4th, 1886, Miles comes down and meets with them, and they surrender for the last time. And what was Martin and Quieta's reward? They got sent to prison too. So when they surrendered, the army realized that this was a very historically significant event. Why was it so significant? Because every other tribe in the United States had already surrendered. Chiricahua Apaches were the last holdouts. So when the Chiricahuas surrendered, all the Indian wars in the United States were over. Now, people say to me, yeah, well, wait, what about Wounded Knee? That was in 1890. That was an uprising on a reservation. They were already on a reservation. Chiricahuas were the last of the 3 Indians to surrender. It forever ended the Indian wars in the United States. So, Miles had them build a monument in Skeleton Canyon where the surrender took place. And this is Ross Sloan and his wife Lola. They were ranchers. This was taken over in 1941. And it's on private property. The landowner used to allow me, I do tours, guided tours in there the first Saturday of each month. The rancher was killed, he was gathering his cattle with a helicopter and crashed and got killed. So then there's new owners and now they close it off, nobody's allowed in there. But anyway, that's the pile of rocks. That's what it looks like the last time I was there. You can see how much smaller it is. That was a lot closer. The mesquite trees are growing out of it. But people would take rocks as souvenirs, don't forget. Exactly a year ago, the August 2021 issue of Wild West magazine, I did an article all about the surrender site, the pile of rocks. I had lots of historical photos of different, sizes from when it was first built over the years and all that. And if you're on Highway 80, since it's on private property, the actual surrender site, the Highway Department in 1934 built this monument, and it has that plaque on it. The plaque's got 3 big mistakes, but that's in a little rest area by the little town of Apache, Arizona. 1940, it was struck by lightning, and Geronimo's revenge, and they rebuilt it. And in fact, it had a more of a flat top. I have photos in 1934 of the dedication. Governor Hunt was there, and it had a flagpole on top. And I guess the flagpole acted like a lightning rod. But when they rebuilt it, they left the flagpole off. So, the Apaches were sent to Fort Bowie. And what I find interesting was they're at Fort Bowie after they surrendered in Skeleton Canyon, and they got to put them on a train and send them to Florida as prisoners. Where they were at Fort Bowie, where the wars ended, Apache wars ended, was only several hundred yards away from where Cochise stood the tent where the Apache wars started. So, everybody in this photo has been identified. Here's Geronimo, Naiche, Chisna, Fun. Fun had a real tragic life. Garditha, the little boy. By the way, who's heard of Lozin? How many of you have heard of Lozin, the woman warrior? Yeah, she's not in this photo. There was an elderly Apache man talking to a historian in the 1950s, and he said Lozin was in the photo, and then he realized that Lozin wasn't in the photo. She was on the reservation, and he recanted. But the fact that he recanted, a lot of people didn't know that, and so a lot of people still think Lozin is in the photo. But historians go by the documentation, and so she's not in the picture. She was a woman warrior. What was I saying? I get sidetracked. I always jump ahead. But yeah, I was talking about Fun. I forget his Apache name. The Chiricahuas were sent to Florida as POWs, and they went from this high mountain desert air to sea level, the ocean, and they just started dying of respiratory diseases at a really alarming rate. So General Crook again came to the rescue and said, "You got to move them." So you know where the Army moved them to? Alabama. It was actually worse. It was more unhealthy. Well, while in Alabama, Fun thought his wife was flirting with another man, and in a jealous rage, he shoots her. And he thinks, oh my God, what are the white people gonna do? He puts the gun to her head and commits suicide. And he turned out he only grazed his wife in the leg. So he led a real tragic life. And he was a real, you could see how kind of muscular, a big guy he was. At the Battle of Alisos Creek, he was really something over there, fighting with the Mexicans. There was a bag of ammunition they needed, and he ran out, and the Mexican was shooting at him. He was zigzagging and grabbed it and ran back, and he was like a real hero there for the Chiricahua Apaches. So it was really sad what happened to him. So anyway, they were sent to Florida, and here's a photo of Geronimo And Naiche in the center, the chief, and this is Mangus. Now people say, oh yeah, I heard of Mangus coloratus. It's not Mangus coloratus. There's no photograph of Mangus coloratus. He's been long since killed 10 years before. This is his son who just went by the name of Mangus. So again, they were dying at an alarming rate in Florida. They were sent to the Mount Vernon Barracks in Alabama, and General Crook showed up at Alabama because the cemetery over there is just full of Apaches. And when he arrived, the Apaches swarmed around him. They just loved him. And they were so glad to see him. And they knew he was really trying to help them. And he says, look, I'm going to see what I can do. That was in 1890. And just a couple months after he left, he died of a heart attack. So they're stuck in Alabama. Finally, the government moves them to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And they fare a little better. You know, now they're kind of getting closer to the southwest, a little bit more desert type climate. This is an interesting photo. It not only shows you how tall Naiche is. I found out Geronimo was left-handed. You see his rope on the saddle over there. Geronimo would sign photographs of himself. He only spelling he knew was he learned with his name, and he would sell these photographs. He would get all these photographs and he would sign them and he would sell them. When he passed away in 1909, he had $10,000 in the bank account in Lawton, Oklahoma. You know, I don't know what that is in, you know, comparable today. But anyway, Naiche, on the other hand, he converted to Christianity. And it wasn't just a thing to appease the white man. He really, it was total, his conversion. He named his son Christian. He took the first name of Christian. He went by Christian Naiche, and he had this beautiful handwriting. You see it there, up and down, Christian Naiche. And he named his son Christian Naiche. He wrote hymns for the church. And I found these hymns. I do a PowerPoint just on Naiche's life, and I have the hymns that he wrote in the Apache language and the translation. It's really beautiful. So in 1909, Geronimo died still as a prisoner of war. This is at Fort Sill on the military base. I was there about a year ago with a bunch of friends, and they all wanted to see Geronimo's grave. And I've been doing, like I mentioned, a lot of research on Naiche. Naiche didn't die at Fort Sill. In 1913, the government finally freed them as POWs. And they were given the choice. Well, they all wanted to go back to Arizona. The governor of Arizona said, no, you're not stepping foot over here. The Mescalero Apaches in south central New Mexico, I don't know if you've heard of the town of Ruidoso, they offered to accept the Chiricahuas on their reservation. So about 75% agreed to go to Mescalero. The other 25 stayed at Fort Sill. So to this day, not only are they a displaced tribe, they're also separated. And I know both Fort Sill Chiricahuas and I know Mescalero Chiricahuas. And believe me, there's a rivalry between them. It's kind of interesting. Anyway, so I'm here and I've been studying Naiche, and he had a lot of children. He had 3 wives over the years, and a lot of children. And one of his children was a young man named Paul Naiche. I think he was 20 years old when he died. I think tuberculosis. A lot of them died of respiratory. And I've seen photographs of Paul Naiche, just incredibly more handsome than Naiche was. The guy looked like he'd be a male model today. And I didn't know a whole lot about him. I'm walking, there's all these white military tombstones, and I'm walking by and I see Paul Naiche's grave. And it was kind of caught me off guard. I was expected much more than Geronimo's grave. Naiche, when they were at Alabama, the military offered the warrior that they wanted to sign on as scouts, and Naiche agreed. He became a sergeant. I have photographs of him with the sergeant stripes and the other PowerPoint. So when he died, he had the military tombstone. This is at the Mescalero Reservation in southern New Mexico, and it has his chosen name, first name he took, Christian Naiche. They weren't scouts in the sense where they would actually work for the army. They couldn't leave. There were still POWs. It was kind of an interesting, kind of a strange relationship. There were POWs, but they were military employees. And they would do work, manual labor, but they also learned English, they learned trades, carpentry and things like that. So Naiche died in 1919. He was free man with about 6 years, something like that. He was only about 64 years old when he died. Tuberculosis, or influenza. Okay, we're jumping back now. This is one of the C.S. Bly photos. See here, copyright 1886 by C.S. Bly. This was taken in Canyon de los Embudos. Neither Geronimo or Naiche are in this photo. This is Naiche's cousin. Oops. Forgetting which one is he. Naiche. Naiche, I'm pointing him out because he was responsible for something pretty interesting. On the way to Fort Bowie, when they surrendered in Skeleton Canyon, 6 adult Apaches and a baby changed their mind at night. It took several days to get to Fort Bowie, and they escaped. This formed the nucleus of something called the Bronco Apaches. Now, the Bronco Apaches, I have disagreement with other historians. Some historians said every single Chiricahua surrendered at Skeleton Canyon. It doesn't add up to me because there were a lot of Bronco Apaches, and there were just too many to all originate from the 6 adults and the 1 baby. There would have had to have been incest involved and things like that, just because they ended up propagating. There were just so many. So I think some never surrendered, and they met up with the Bronco, the ones that didn't that escaped on the way to Fort Bowie. And Naiche led the escape. Does anybody know when the last raid by Bronco Apache in the United States was? In 1924. The last raid by Bronco Apaches in Mexico was in 1937. It's an amazing story. 3 different historians right now are writing books about the Bronco Apaches. Alicia Delgadillo, Bernd Kuhn, the Swedish historian, and Linda Sanchez. So I'm looking forward to all 3 of them. This is Naiche's grandson, Preston Naiche. He served in the Korean War, the United States. Anybody here in the military know what kind of a, patch?
First armor.
Armor division?
First armor.
Yeah. I kind of see the Athabascan features, the originating from Siberia and a lot of the Apaches. Armor division. And it's so unfortunate.
It's World War, or Korean War, that's what best guess.
I was showing this slideshow. No, it was the Naiche slideshow. I have this photograph in that one as well. For the New Mexico's Historical Society, their conference. It was in Ruidoso a few years ago. And I'm kind of getting off the subject. But, no, not Ruidoso, Alamogordo. And Alamogordo is only about an hour away from the Mescalero Division. So there were a lot of Apaches in the audience. And when I was done with the PowerPoint, this elderly Apache woman came up to me and she said, "Can you put that picture back up of Preston Naiche?" And I said, "Sure." The projector was still on. So I went back to it and I was looking, she was just looking at it. And she said, "Can I take a picture?" I said, "Sure." And I said, "Did you know him?" She said, "That's my grandfather." Another tragic story. Became an alcoholic and died in a car crash. The Chiricahua Apaches of today mainly reside, I mentioned, serving near Fort Sill, Oklahoma, or Mescalero, New Mexico. There is a tradition, some of you may have heard of the coming of age ceremony. The girls go through the puberty ceremony. The ceremony started, back in the very beginning of the Apache culture, thousands of years ago, and some of them still do it today. And part of it, this was taken in the 1920s, is what they call the giant teepee. And they build this very big teepee. The bottom half of it is covered with branches, and they have a tarp over the top. And then they cut, can you see these trees here? And it all has significance. There's trees to the side, and at the bottom of it are cattail rushes, because the young girl comes out of the teepee, and she's supposedly symbolically coming out of the water, and she becomes a white painted woman. And I was invited to one just last year. My friend and I went to it. The father of the girl. Part of the ceremony is harvesting the mezcal, the agave. And even though they live in South Central New Mexico, where there are agaves. He wanted the agave plants to come from the Chiricahua Mountains, their traditional homeland. So all of the Apaches came, and my wife and I have a cottage rental business, so they all stayed in our cottages. We went with them and harvested. We had a good time, had a big party in the backyard and all that. And he said, well, when we have these ceremonies, you need to come. So my friend and I went, and it was wonderful. And we even went in sacred teepee. A couple of us gringo guys, you know, I was all nervous, and she blessed us with the pollen. This little girl, you know, and she knew me, so she winked at me, and that made me feel a little better. So anyway, the reason I have this is because I took a picture of the giant teepee, the one we just went to, and look at the, you know, nothing's changed. Here's the trees they cut down, see them? And you can see the brush along the bottom and the tarp on the top. It was just amazing to me. It was just such a neat experience. And we even, you know, my friend and I were standing there and they were putting the poles up, and my friend Pascal, come on, Bill, help us. We can help you. So we got to put up the, actually help erect the teepee. It was pretty neat. So that was a really neat experience. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for having me here today. I don't know how we're doing on time. Can I take questions?
How much are your books?
They're $20 each, and this isn't just a sales pitch, this is the truth. These are the last 10 left. It's going into a second printing. It's going into a second printing. Did you want one saved? Did you say earlier you wanted one?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So there are
There are 8 left.
not 9. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, any questions? Anybody have any questions? Yes, please.
Was Geronimo ever at Fort Huachuca after he surrendered?
No, not after he surrendered, never at Fort Huachuca. He was in this area, you know, this is part of Apache, but no, he was never at Fort Huachuca. That's a good question. Okay,
Great talk.
thank you so much. Yes, sir.
I went on a long and hot and stickery hike
You're like the info man.
to the Charleston graveyard, following an ancient guy who had studied the whole thing. And he said that there were 4 young men from Charleston who had been killed by Geronimo up in Ramsey Canyon. And I kind of took it to be a reference as quite possibly the last Anglos that were killed by that bandits when they were still running around and looking for
Very
safe
well could have been, very well, yeah. You know, the Chiricahuas are all over the Huachuca Mountains, not at the fort, but yeah, this was all part of Apache, and very well could have been.
Oh, I'm sure they fought for each other over the
Yeah.
Ramsey Canyon and all that for centuries.
I think there was an incident at a charcoal camp in the Huachuca Mountains, and that might have been it. I don't want to.
Sure.
Any other questions?
So I got a follow-up to
Yeah,
that
sure.
then. Where was Miles stationed? Was he at
Miles
Fort
was at
Bowie?
Fort Huachuca. Miles was at both Fort Huachuca and Fort Bowie.
He was at both
He
places.
was at both places.
Well, I heard this story. I was told a story by one of the cowboys that used to work for the Boyce family at Empire Ranch.
Mhm.
And he tells a story about Mr. Vail, who was the original
Yeah,
owner
Vail.
of the Empire, losing a bunch of horses, couldn't find him. General Miles sends a galloper to the Empire,
Mhm.
thinks he has Mr. Vail's horse. It's got a big V on it, white horse, stud horse. So Vail goes down and meets Geronimo in a cell at Fort Huachuca. And this is a story that I got from one of the
Oh,
cowboys that was handed down, you know, 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, no.
So that was the reason.
Was only in a cell at a fort one time, and that was at Fort Bowie. right
At
after
Fort
the-
Bowie.
Yeah, right after the surrender.
I need to change my story.
You know, every time if I ever, you know, $1 for, you know, Geronimo ate dinner with my great-grandmother and all that stuff. But, you know, it's, people mean well. Yes, sir.
Do the Apaches use horses or do they?
Yeah, they use horses. They were not, that's a good question. I get that a lot. They were not, these, horse culture like the Plains tribes that selectively bred them. The Apaches would steal horses, ride the horses till they're dropped, and then eat the horses. They preferred horse meat over beef. But yeah, they did use horses, sure, but they stole them all. Way back there.
I was reading about Naiche, and in one book it said that his name meant mischief maker. Is
Yeah,
that
it
correct?
meant troublesome or mischievous.
Okay.
Yeah, and Geronimo's Apache name, Goyatle, man, the one who yawns, they should have switched names.
Oh.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought I saw their hand, but somebody else. No, okay, all right, well, again, oh, yes,
Over in Nogales, there used to be a man named Pete Kitchens.
big kitchen, yeah.
Did the Apaches get that far over?
Yeah, they did. That Sonoyta Valley was the very western edge of their, range. And they would, once in a while, make exceptions and stray further, but they never, no Apaches as far as I'd ever been, to Phoenix or anything like that. I had an old man say, yeah, I found Geronimo's gold mine in Superstition Mountain. Anyway.
Bill, do you have any insight on the area out in where you live? There's a reservation sign. Can you tell us the dimensions of the area?
Of
What's
reservation.
going on there with the Chiricahuas?
Oh, you're talking about when, let me know if this is what you referred to. When we had the dedication of that plaque I showed earlier, I had the two Chiricahua gentlemen. One of them was the Attorney General for the Apache Chiricahua tribe. And he was a Chiconin and the other was a Chihene. And I got a call from a friend of mine who lives in the Chiricahua Mountains in Whitetail Canyon. And he said, this is before the ceremony, he said, are you gonna have a pasture? I said, yeah. He said, I'd like to donate my property, 140 acres to them. And I said, well, that'd be great, they'll be here. So, you hear stuff like that, but sure enough, I mean, the guy came and it was a handshake deal, but they're still working on it, getting the deeds done. And then another couple who owned 80 acres said, well, if they're doing it, we want to do it too. So what's happening is, again, you have the Chiricahuas in Oklahoma, you have them in southern New Mexico. These Chiricahuas want a third branch in their traditional homelands because the other two branches are not in Apacheria. And so they want to start some over there. They're wonderful gentlemen. They're saying, we don't want reparations. We're not going to bring casinos. We just want to have land where it's supposed to be. And if people want to donate the land, that's great. That's fine with me.
This would be south of Rodeo, as I recall?
One of them is on the road between Highway 80 and Portal, the 80 acres, and the 140 is in a canyon in the Chiricahua Mountain itself. They're not connected, Yes.
Now, here in southern Arizona, there's two groups, I guess, of the Apache. There's San Carlos Reservation and the White Mountain. How'd that get divided up?
They're all bands of the Western Apaches. The San Carlos, the White Mountain, the Coyoteros, the Aravaipa, the Tontos. Remember I said the four bands of the Chiricahuas? Well, the Westerns have bands as well. And so they're all closely related.
Why is there two reservations?
That gets real complicated, how the reservation started, why did they?
Who scouted it?
The San Carlos was started first because the government was looking for the very worst land that they didn't want, and they called it Hell's 40 Acres. It was totally worthless, and so that was a lot of Apaches were put on the San Carlos Reservation, and then the White Mountain Reservation came later on because that's more beautiful, White Mountains, but how they came about and all that are stories among themselves. I'm not real up on that. It's mainly the Chiricahuas that I think, mainly interested in. Yeah. Anything else? Good questions. Okay. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill.